Hi, I'm AC Flurry, and housing has been my endgame for a very long time. But just because I love building things doesn't mean that I love everything about how ESO implements housing. So in this video, I'm going to talk about the 7 things that I hate the most. Pet peeve number 1. I hate how the devs manipulate the drop rate of housing-only materials. After 7 years of gathering, the pattern is clear. There is nothing random about the drop rate. It's feast or famine. Sometimes these materials drop from almost every node, and then suddenly, out of the blue, you can gather for hours and get next to nothing at all. As each piece of furnishing can take an eye-watering number of materials, the sudden scarcity can leave you with your build half-finished and steam coming out of your ears. Pet peeve number 2. There are no building materials in surveys. Surveys contain heaps of stuff for making gear, but nothing for housing. You either spend half your life gathering manually, or you pay through the nose at the guild traders. I understand that trading is as much of an endgame as housing, but manipulating the drop rate to favour traders at the expense of builders is extremely short-sighted. Builders are self-motivated players who don't desert the game as soon as something flashy and new comes along. We deserve a fair deal when it comes to materials that impact our ability to build. Pet peeve number 3. Style-specific housing mats that have a ridiculously low drop rate. I'm talking here about things like Stendhal stamps, Arcsand sprockets, and Ivory Brigade clasps. Stendhal stamps are required for high aisle furnishings. Sprockets are needed for the reach furnishings, including the dwarven components, and the Ivory Brigade clasps are needed for the Leyawan furnishings. Not only is the drop rate for these 3 materials incredibly low, all of them have to be shared with players crafting gear. That pushes the price on traders to astronomical levels. So given how many of these materials are needed, buying them is out of reach for players like me. Pet peeve number 4. Furnishing recipes that require ridiculous numbers of materials. I'll give you just one example. The Leyawan hearth, carved wood, requires 15 mundane runes, 15 heartwood, 10 decorative wax, 10 regulus, 1 rosin, which is a gold item, and 2 Ivory Brigade clasps. All of that to make just 1 item. Pet peeve number 5. Crown store only houses. It's no coincidence that in the last few years, the nicest houses can only be bought from the crown store, for crowns. Crowns are not monopoly money. They translate directly into real-world dollars. Now, I know a lot of people pay the ESO subscription 12 months in advance, so they end up with roughly 19,000 free crowns in a year. But at the moment, the 2 most expensive crown store only houses cost 18,800 and 18,750 crowns respectively. A number of others cost 17,500 crowns each. Do the math. Even if you saved up all your crowns, you would only be able to afford one of the super expensive crown store houses per year. If you don't save all of your free crowns and still want one of these houses, you will have to buy crowns at whatever exchange rate ZOZ demands. Real dollars for a digital house that will disappear if you leave ESO. Think about that. I don't sub for a year in advance, and I don't buy Crown Store only houses. I simply can't afford them. Even if I could though, I'm not sure that I would. When I first started playing ESO, way back in 2018, I was astounded by how much you were given for free. An in-room, a mount, pets, stuff. And if you progressed through the game, you got even more. You really could play the game the way you wanted to play it. That is no longer the case. ESO has become monetized to an almost obscene level. Rewards in-game have shrunk. New content that you have to pay for is more of the same old, and the best items are now Crown Store only. I know that servers cost money to run. I know that updates and new content cost money to develop. And I know that every company needs to make a profit. The only question is, how much of a profit? In 2025, this quest for profit has led to the detriment of the game. New players will still get a bang for their buck because the game contains so much content already. But for those of us who've been playing for years, ESO simply isn't value for money anymore. Pet peeve number 6. Quality of life improvements farmed out to external add-on developers. Yes, I'm sure the add-on developers love creating add-ons, so I don't begrudge them their creativity. Unfortunately, ZOZ is using those add-ons to fill gaps that should not be there in the first place. For example, the base game precision editor allows us to group objects. This is great. But if we want to ungroup those same objects, we have to put the parent object away. That's like having a light switch that turns on but won't turn off. Not unless you yank the whole thing out of the wall. Contrast this to EHT. This add-on allows you to group and ungroup objects simply and easily, without having to mess up what you've already created. Not having such an obvious function in a game we have paid for feels wrong. Pet peeve number 7. ESO crafting styles that are not in alphanumeric order. Whenever you learn a new motif, the style gets tacked on to the end of your list of styles, with the earliest ones at the front and the most recent ones at the very end. I don't bother making gear sets these days, but there are times when the only way I can access certain housing materials is by crafting the appropriate gear with mimic stones and then deconstructing it to get a few of the special materials I need. But before I can use mimic stones, I have to scroll through so many styles to find the one I want. If the list were in alpha order, it would take no time at all. Honestly, this is a hole in the game that just doesn't make sense. Sorting things into alphanumeric lists has been a basic function of all databases since the 1980s. How is it possible that ZOZ is incapable of providing such a simple quality of life fix? Okay, that's me for now. If you have any pet peeves of your own, please add them in comments. Sometimes it's therapeutic to vent. And if you enjoyed this video, please subscribe. Cheers.